Good evening and good morning to those of you joining us from North America. I believe we've actually even got someone joining us from South Africa too, which is absolutely fantastic. So we've gone truly global. Welcome to B2BNXT. This is our first virtual instance of this series. For those of you who've been before, you'll know we run this series as a live event, and we actually planned on running this back in March, but for obvious reasons, it was cancelled. I'm genuinely delighted though to be able to run this and that so many of you could join us. So thank you. I hope in true B2BNXT fashion, you have a glass of wine, a beer, or whatever tipple you like in hand and are ready to hear some absolutely fantastic conversation. Personally, I love this topic. You know, we've been talking about understanding the B2B buyer for years, but as we all know, it's an evolving theme, and customer experience is very much at the heart of it. So we're going to hear a lot today about challenges being faced by B2B marketeers in relation to customer experience, how customer experience is playing an even more important role in light of COVID. And I know we're probably all sick and tired of hearing about it, but it is an important factor to see how and if things have changed. And there's loads more we're going to be covering as well. And to bring you those fantastic insights, we have two fabulous speakers. So I'm delighted to introduce you to our first speaker, Ian Golding. He did pre-warn me actually that he was coming from a virtual award ceremony and was meant to be wearing a suit, but he has completely let me down, but still looking very sharp. Ian hates to be called an expert or guru on anything, so I've settled with specialist, and Ian, I hope you're all right with that.
I'm happy with that.
But he is a CX specialist supporting global brands on their CX strategies, as well as an ambassador of the Customer Experience Professionals Association. So welcome, Ian.
Thank you so much, Caroline, for a lovely welcome. I'm sorry for letting you down.
Yeah, well, it's too late now, isn't it? We'll have to do it next time.
Well, the thing is, I was very good at sticking to time, so I had a little bit of time to change out of it. So I feel more relaxed. But to make up for it, I've got my drink in a crystal cut glass. So you can imagine me as James Bond with my tuxedo on.
Which I have to say is not a glass of wine or anything. It is an Energizer drink. So doubly let me down. Never mind. Next time. And our other fabulous speaker is Nick Hague. So Nick is co-founder and head of growth for B2B International. He's going to be giving us an in-depth look at how organizations are evolving and the impact CX has on your brand. So welcome, Nick.
Thanks, Caroline. Great to be with you and part of this great panel along with Ian. I do need to apologise, but I've come back to back on various different presentations and meetings this afternoon, so I haven't even got myself a drink or a beer, but I definitely will be going to the fridge following the conclusion of this.
You're still looking dapper though as well, so that's all good. So while Nick is obviously looking at the more kind of in-depth side, Ian's going to be looking at offering a more conceptual view of understanding today's consumer behaviour and the strategies behind great customer experience. So Ian, whilst you get your slides all set up, I'll just let you all know that we are having a Q&A at the end of the session. So any questions, please pop them into the chat and we'll try and get through as many as possible. I'm reliably informed that Ian is a reporter's dream, so he never fully prepares. So I'm looking forward to seeing what he's got up his sleeve today. So Ian, without further ado, over to you.
Fabulous. Thank you, Caroline, and thank you for such a lovely introduction. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone who is listening into this afternoon, my afternoon. Thank you for taking the time to listen to a very important subject in normal times, let alone in the very challenging times that we find ourselves in. And the subject of understanding who the buyer is also a subject that is not just important to the marketing community, or shouldn't just be important to the marketing community, it should be important to all organizations. So in the next 15 minutes, I want to share just a little bit of theory with you. If I validate what you already know, brilliant, but hopefully I will inspire you to get the juices flowing to grill Nick and myself a little bit later on in the session. The first thing I need to clarify is that when we think about the relationship with the buyer, Who is it that we're talking about? And the world has got very excited about different terminologies to describe the relationship with the customer. The three terms you see on the screen are the three most commonly used terms to describe that relationship. But many businesses still use these terms interchangeably with each other, thinking they mean the same thing, which they don't. Customer service is not the same thing as customer experience. It is only one element of the experience, in exactly the same way that sales is, that marketing is, that operations is, that everything is. Customer experience is the representation of everything an organization does that enables customers to interact with your products and services. Everyone in your organization, whether they face the customer or not, has a role to play in delivering that experience. But just recognizing that you have an experience still isn't enough. If an organization wants to deliver sustainable growth, it is necessary to be able to deliver that experience in a customer-centric environment. To be a customer-centric organization is something completely different altogether. It essentially means that every time your organization does anything, it thinks and acts in the interest of the customer. And none of you need me to tell you that regrettably, much of the time, that's not what organizations are doing. They are thinking and acting in the interests of the business. But if we want to achieve sustainable growth, we cannot do that anymore. We have got to balance the needs of the business with the needs of the customer. And a customer-centric environment will enable us to do that. But that being said, we do need to understand what the experience looks like that we are delivering to our customer. And all experiences are made up of these three component parts: the functional, the accessible, and the emotional. The functional component of all experiences represents your products and your services. Historically, most organizations, when they were created to differentiate themselves on the functional component alone. But unless your products and services are completely unique, it is now increasingly difficult, if not impossible, to do that, which is why the accessible component has become ever more important. How easy is it for your customers to be able to interact with your products and services? Which is why the increasing evolution of digital technology is becoming more and more important in differentiating the experience. But it is actually the third component that is the most important of the three. Because the third component, the emotional component, is the one of the three that your customers are most likely to remember. And customers will remember one of three things with all experiences they have. They'll remember very good things, they'll remember very bad things, or they will remember nothing. And remembering nothing is by far and away the worst of those three emotional outcomes, because it means your customer has no relationship, no emotional connection to your brand. And so the next time they choose to do something, previous experiences are unlikely to inform what they do. When it comes to differentiating on the whole experience, to turn your buyer, your customer, into an advocate, it is important to understand what transformation means. This chart is something that I call the customer experience continuum. And all organizations on earth sit somewhere in this line. Regrettably, the overwhelming majority of organizations sit on the left-hand side, delivering what we call random, unexpected experiences. If the characteristics that you see underneath this ring a bell with you, then it is very possible that your organization sits on that part of the continuum. On the right-hand side are the most customer-centric organizations on the planet. Are companies who, when they were created, typically made the definitive decision to differentiate themselves not on their product services alone, but on the whole experience. The challenge for a legacy organization, not created that way, is to understand how to transform from the left-hand side to the right-hand side. And if a business has an aspiration to become customer-centric, to get there, it first needs to get to the middle of this continuum, where it would be able to deliver what is the intentional or desired experience. You want the experience to be in the first place. And to get there, this has got to be a shared vision within your organization. It cannot be one person dragging everyone kicking and screaming. You have got to give people the ability to think. Now, transfer is not just about transforming mindset. It is also about transforming legacy processes and systems. But if you want to become customer-centric, the first thing you've got to the way people think. If you change the way people think, they will be more accountable when things go wrong. And we also have to change the way we measure what we do. We cannot just focus on internal KPIs. We must focus as much on measuring customer perception as we do employee perception. But the most important thing of all is that if we want to achieve this transformation, we can only do so through good cross-functional governance. One of the reasons why businesses around the world are struggling to transform is because they are failing to break down the walls and silos that exist between functions. What we need to determine is, do you know what that is supposed to be? Do you know how you want your buyer to feel every time they interact with you? And regrettably, too many organizations around the world don't know, which means that they're delivering the experience by accident. They are reliant on the goodwill of people to make it happen. For the experience to be intentional, it is essential that your organization is able to adopt a structured, rigorous approach to making the management of the experience intentional. What you see on the screen is a framework that I use to teach people about this subject around the world. And as you can see, the framework has 3 parts to it: people, strategy, and measurement. If I take the framework to the next level, this is what it looks like. And let me walk you through the framework. The strategy part of the framework is essentially 3, in principle, very simple questions. Do you know who your customer is? Do you know what their experience to be? And does everyone in your organization know the role they play in delivering that experience? These are 3 simple questions that many organizations cannot answer. And if they cannot answer them, it makes the second part of the framework very challenging. Because the second part of the framework we call measurement or the facts. In other words, how capable is your organization delivering the strategy? To determine how capable your business is, we need to know what the customer journey looks like. Because it is the customer journey that is bringing the experience to life for your customers, whether you know it or not. And this part of the framework is concerned with the adoption of a series of interconnected, continuous activities to manage the customer journey. The activities include knowing who the customer is from the first part of the framework, so you can measure the journey to identify the small number of priorities having the greatest detrimental effect on customer perception and financial performance. And when you know what those priorities are, you then fix them. And then you do that all over again and all over again forever. But you can't do any of this without the third part of the framework. The third part of the framework that is all about people. And this part of the framework is concerned with the creation of and the sustaining of an environment, a culture that enables your people to think and act in the interests of the customer. A framework like that is vital in normal times. But in the current circumstances that we find ourselves in, it is even more important that we have a structured way of focusing our organization to see what the future is going to look like. What you see on the screen is an adaptation of the Kotter change model, which you may have come across before. And what we know about businesses today is that human beings are going through a variety of emotions, starting at the beginning of this situation with shock, denial, anger. And we are in a situation where many are still angry. They may be very frustrated. They may be confused about what's going to happen. And what we need now, more than any time before, is how do our customers feel right now? And what do we need to do to get them seeing positivity of the future? That there is a way out of this and that they can get the excitement and energy back. To be able to get ourselves through this situation, out of the other side as successfully as possible, we must not the importance of people. And it is vitally important that we are comfortable that the most significant underlying principle of the engagement with customers, this subject of customer experience, is the principle of empathy. Empathy is something that many business leaders do not connect to financial performance. But I want to reassure you that there is a direct link between empathy and financial performance. Because the better able an organization is at empathizing with its customers, the more likely it is to turn those customers into advocates or fans. Fans become loyal. Loyal customers are more likely to come back to you more often and more likely about you. And if they come to you more often and tell others about you, you will make more money. And so in this current situation we find ourselves in, we need people to know that empathy builds advocacy, advocacy leads to loyalty, loyalty delivers growth. Many are accelerating digital technology to replace human interaction. But replacing human interaction will see you replacing the very thing that your customers are likely to remember for the right reason. I hope that you found what I've shared with you interesting. I know that I have hopefully put a number of questions in Caroline's mind, but also in all of your minds. And I also know that I've created a number of connections for Nick to hang on to. So please think about your questions and I'd be delighted to answer them as we continue the session. But for now, back to you, Caroline.
Thank you very much. Back to the studio. Thank you very much, Ian. That was fantastic. And yeah, as you say, guys, whilst you absorb what Ian's talked about, please do put questions into the chat whilst it's still fresh in your minds. And while Nick gets his slides kind of up, I do have a couple of questions, or maybe just one, depending on time.
Okay.
So you mentioned on your CX framework, the question,
yes.
Does everyone know their role in delivering the desired customer experience?
Yes.
And I just thought to contextualize this for our audience, what role should marketing and sales play in this, in driving great customer experiences or even just customer experience strategy?
So I'll answer it because with all of these questions, I could take 2 hours to answer it. The one thing that I would say is that when you think about in the past, I spent 17 years in the corporate world. One of the organizations I worked with as an employee was GE, General Electric. Mm-hmm. And I showing my age, was lucky enough to work at G. Welsh, was still CEO. Sadly, he's recently passed away. And Jack Welsh is still known as one of the most transformational business leaders of all time. And one of the things I was taught in the very early days is that G's approach to strategy was very, very simple. And it was 3 words: find, win, keep. And the principle is that our businesses need to know what we're doing to find new customers. We've got to win their business, but as importantly, we've got to know how to keep them. And over the years, many businesses have been so obsessed with the finding bit and the winning bit that they've forgotten about the keep bit, which is why typically marketing teams are creating campaign after campaign after campaign to keep filling that leaky bucket.
Yeah.
What we need is for marketing to influence the rest of the organization, to understand how to connect those 3 parts of the strategy together. So we don't stop after win, but we are managing the whole experience so we can keep them for as long as possible. Yeah. I hope that's a decent answer to the question.
It does. And I guess that comes back to what you were saying about from the random to the differentiated. You know, these random acts, if marketeers can think about it in a more holistic fashion, then that's where they're going to stem towards more the differentiated.
Absolutely.
I'm a good student. Thank you so much. And, you know, I think now we can obviously move from you, Selfie, and where you the more conceptual side, and Nick, moving on to you with the science behind it. So I will now pass over to you.
Thanks, Caroline. And I think what Ian's done there is teed things up quite nicely, because, you know, he's theorizing, he's talking about the theory of you know, customer experience and being customer centric. I'm a practitioner, so B2B International is a market research agency, and what I want to share with you over the next 15 minutes is findings from some of the surveys that we've carried out, speaking to marketeers and CMOs out there to understand, you know, the challenges that they face. And you know, they do need to wear many hats. So, you know, when they are lumped with, you know, looking after customer experience, and when we're speaking to customer experience managers, you know, what makes them stand out and what makes a CX leader versus a CX laggard. So in terms of the presentation itself today, I'm going to share with you lots of bits of data that we've thought leadership bits that we own in terms of, you know, having a look at the data itself. And I want to start really with a scene setter here. Because we carry out an annual survey at B2B International for our own thought leadership, where we speak to global CMOs in multinational corporates all over the world. And as I say, CMOs do wear many hats these days. They're tasked with many duties. And so, of course, you know, they need to make every pound or dollar spent deliver some return. And that's obviously their number one challenge. But very close behind it, you can see at 52%, is you know, the fact of trying to deliver an excellent customer experience, and this is about throughout the whole entire customer life cycle as well, cited by 52%. It indicates that, you know, if this is a challenge for 52%, then customer experience, you know, what Ian's just talked about there, it seems very simple, doesn't it? It's obvious stuff, but why is it then that it's a lot more difficult than it seems? I think, you know, so delivering a world-class customer experience then it isn't as easy, and especially maybe in B2B markets. Well, we know that at B2B International only too well. Most corporates are driven to make money. It's the CEO's prerogative anyway, because otherwise, if shareholders don't get their quarterly return when then they're out. So you know, they're not always customer centric. They're profit driven, and I think because of in B2B markets especially, neither are the systems or the customers interact with. You know, they're often legacy systems historically that they haven't invested in, back office systems that don't give that true omni-channel experience. You know, Ian was talking about the person to person, and people do business with people. That's really important to remember. But the new world that we're in as well, you know, there does need to be that digital element too. So the omni-channel experience is seriously lacking. From all the research that we've carried out, we know that there's 6 pillars of customer experience, and these were the foundations you can see there of my latest book on the right hand side there. From, you know, commitment and fulfillment through to proactivity and evolution, and knowing your customers, knowing how they are, but using this as a customer centricity. Everything is driven by what the customer agenda is. What we can see is that there's only 15% of B2B brands are CX leaders, and I'm going to talk to you in the next slide about what those CX leaders do. But these CX leaders are strong on 5 or 6 of these pillars here. So from commitment, from the CEO down, they understand that this is a differentiator, and they want to do something different. Ian talked of very much the cross-functional governance, and you can see the third pillar there, seamlessness. Too often we're siloed in a B2B sector where it is just about the finance department, the procurement, logistics, operations, none of them all being very profit driven and functional, but none talking and having the customer at heart in how they design the process. So what you can see from this chart is that there's many companies that still struggle with meeting customer expectations. And from our tracking of data, if anything, companies are stagnating or going backwards, especially if you look at responsiveness and proactive and evolution, where we asked this question in 2015, the first time we started tracking this. We asked this at the back end of 2019, and companies just aren't moving it forward. There's lots of noise about customer experience. There's lots of expense spent on platforms, the likes of Qualtrics. But are they actually moving the needle and being able to deliver a greater customer experience? The answer is no. And we know that there's 30% of companies in our survey that are laggards, i.e. they're not strong at any one of these criteria. So developing your company's customer experience really is a differentiator. So these CX leaders, and we know there's only 15% out there in the marketplace. How do they stand out? How are they different? And how do they differ from the laggards and those people that maybe can meet 1 or 2 of those pillars in that average bucket in the middle? Well, laggards, they just lack a foundational understanding of customer needs, attitudes and behaviors. Leaders, on the other hand, and again back to Ian's the CX Golding framework, that the starting point is know your customers, that strategy. And leaders, they place the customer at the heart of all the decisions they make, and significantly more likely to consider things like product development, proposition development, and also segmentation programs to closely align their propositions to different segments in the market, and therefore more closely meeting their needs. So you can see innovation, and especially around that that proposition, developing different propositions for them to be more distinct in the marketplace. I think when it comes to customer experience as well, and customer loyalty, then there's lots of different metrics. People ask satisfaction, of course, big banks of satisfaction questions. They also ask the NPS question as well. I think what we've seen though in mapping the customer journey, or asking the NPS question there on the left hand side, really this is just a starting point. This is a table stake, but there is no real difference between some of those that are just meeting 1 or 2 of those CX pillars, as opposed to the leaders. People know the importance of speaking to customers, understanding the different interactions across the journey, and having something like a metric of the NPS. The difference is on the right hand side, and what we do see is what makes a customer experience leader and start to really stand out from the crowd is the fact that they go deeper, and they look to really deliver consistency across different platforms. So obviously there is a digital element, but also face to face as well, just making sure that there's consistency on how they deal with customers. And I think what's interesting there is about the use of personas for different customer types, again down to that value proposition, but tapping into the emotions of the B2B buyer. And Ian talked about emotions and empathy. That is crucial. We've done lots of research around the importance of emotions in B2B decision making, and that really does start to connect and make people stand out and do things differently. So that was the first piece of research that I wanted to share with you in terms of, the fact that people are struggling with, with starting to embed customer experience, even when we look back over the last 5 years with all the money and words that have been spoken about it. But what are those real leaders, those people that found success and been able to differentiate the business on customer experience can do? I wanted to share with you for the second part of my presentation on some research that we've been carrying out during these COVID times, because I think it's really interesting, with what holds for the rest of the year, and with one eye already on 2021 and beyond, what can we do differently, and where can we place the customer at the heart of business? So we've spoken to 2,000 business decision makers for this piece of research over the months of April and May, so really in the thick of the COVID situation. And businesses are considering a range of more concrete actions moving into 2021 and beyond. We'll see these trends as fitting into four main themes, and I'm going to go through these in turn, but they are, insight and understanding, acting responsibly, developing direct channels, and then a less human touch. And I'm going to finish this section by talking about, as marketeers, we've asked, what strategies are you going to use moving into 2021 with all this in mind. So the first particular trend that come out is really interesting, but again fitting with what Ian says around know your customer. What we've seen is that number one, over 70, nearly 3/4 of business decision makers we spoke to are conducting research or looking to conduct research with customers to better understand what they need. What we've done in the past, it may not be good enough, and that the world has changed. So we need to make sure that we understand customers and understand them from speaking to them through research, understanding them through data to anticipate their future needs. And of course, some of this legacy piece that I talked about, we know when dealing with carrying out research for clients, the CRM systems are either non-existent or in disparate Excel spreadsheets, never mind in a one Salesforce centralized function. So looking to invest and do things differently in the future is what people are looking for around insight and understanding. And when we look at CX leads, they have a higher likelihood that they're placing more emphasis on, as you might expect, speaking to customers, using data and insight. So they're leaders for this reason. They're placing more importance on being customer centric. Number two is acting responsibly, and I suppose in line with how we can help our customers through a crisis like this. Being there for them. I think a lot of people are talking about maybe being a bit more flexible on the payment terms, and CSR has been a topic that's been covered by lots of our clients before, but I think it's coming to the fore now, especially in this whole COVID situation, where they're looking to play a more active role to help out with different initiatives, not just aligned with the business, doing good for business and making sure that they can offer some help, not only to their employees, but to outside into that wider community. I think specific to CX, and again aligning to what Ian talked about up front, our data clearly shows there's a priority being given to more digitally enabled business models in the future. And given that this data is only from firms within a B2B customer base, I think it's even more notable. So maybe historically they haven't invested, but as they are looking to. And aside from improving e-commerce capabilities, B2B firms are also considering opportunities presented by more direct routes to market, where they maybe don't necessarily have to rely on third parties like resellers. We know supply chains have snarled up over the last few months. And for some, this may also involve taking greater control of other delivery mechanisms, whether it's that last mile infrastructure. And again, we can see that leaders, these are leaders because they've already had that investment with the foresight of taking some of that business online. The final trend that we've seen is this less human touch, and with all the talk of digital business models, it's no surprise maybe to also see potential changes in how customers will be served in B2B industries in the future. and with many organisations considering fewer face-to-face and sales visits. And by the way, I think around the customer centric and delivering a world-class customer experience piece, we've been this is for a client of mine in the chemical distribution sector, and we've been carrying out their customer tracker throughout the course of the last 3 months, and their NPS has gone through the roof. They've not had one face-to-face sales visit, but those sales teams have been, sat at their desk on their laptop, doing video calls, answering emails, and on the telephone. And their NPS has risen by 25 points. So thinking about that, what that future business model looks like, we don't need to revert back to the old, and there's some good that may have come out of this in terms of how we can deliver more to the customer's requirements. And our own experience with clients is that there's some reluctance to move to a fully remote or virtual world. And so, we still need to be forced in person through events, conferences, trade shows. Hopefully they won't die in the future. But I think, just as this example today, we are able to deliver against customer needs. So I want to bring the whole of the section to a close today by just talking about some findings from the survey, where back in 2019 we asked chief marketeers and CMOs in their companies, what are their true marketing strategies for the coming year, and we've asked them again in this COVID tracker. And what's really interesting and exciting for us as practitioners in customer experience is that it still holds true at number one. And actually, that's not surprising to us. I've worked and lived through recessions before, and okay, this might be deeper and harder and longer than other recessions. But when times get hard, people look to hold on to what they've got, and to Jack Welch and his find, win, keep. People definitely look to keep when times are hard. So customer experience is still number one in the top marketing strategies. I think what we have seen as a difference with what's happened with the world in the last few months is that there's rises in demand generation and looking for opportunities in new markets. It really does make sense in the given climate. I think also, maybe I've just touched on it with regards to purpose and delivering something over and above in the community, but the rising green positioning and purpose-driven marketing, this is, I think, corporates looking to anticipate what the new normal may look like, and a gamble on customers being more socially conscientious buyers in the future. Value marketing involving a focus on selling on value drivers to support more premium position pricing could be perceived as something more appropriate for a stronger economy. And what we are seeing is that value marketing, I think, even though it's fallen, it is something that should be embraced right now. As should segmentation. People are saying less likely to segment, because as business are under pressure, selling on price instead of value, and targeting any customers versus those low-hanging fruit, they really should be looking at talking about value. And I think most interesting to me is from a fall from number 4 to number 17 in terms of ranking for top marketing strategy. That top of the funnel, raising awareness. It's all about brand building. We've seen from previous recessions that cutting investment in the top of the funnel brand building in tough times certainly weakens growth opportunities in the medium to long term. And so it definitely could be short-sighted and do so at your own peril. So lots of really interesting things to see how people are talking, how they're looking to come out of this current COVID situation. But I think the stick of the rock is the same wording, is that customer experience stands true no matter what. And so I think that's a nice place to leave it, and probably to go into to the Q&A.
Excellent, thanks, Nick. And I've got lots of questions. I've been furiously writing, so I think the first thing I just want to kind of hover on there was, you mentioned obviously going from 4 to 17 as the brand awareness piece. Do you hazard a guess as to why brands are deciding not to invest in brand awareness at this stage?
I think it comes back to, I suppose it's the short-sightedness or the survival mode. And, I think, maybe it's not priority right now. So it's looking to win with what you've got and do with what you've got. And I think that's where, and we've seen it actually with briefs, research brief landing on our desk where, CX is still there tell me what I need to know, what my customers are thinking, what they're looking to change. But I think that maybe they're starting to change their emphasis on doing things differently. So we're seeing a lot of market opportunities where people are looking to push their product into either a new marketplace or a new geography, and lots of product development projects that we're talking about. Again, hence to that innovation piece. But I do think, some of the large branding, we're still talking branding projects with some of the largest clients. But I think it's that priority that as I say, if they are starting to shift their alignment on that, then it's very much short-sightedness, because we will recover from this. We will come out of this. The world might be a different place, but there's still, always winners and losers out of a situation like that.
Absolutely. And I wish if we were having an interactive session with our audience that we could ask them, what where they're putting their monies in, whether brand awareness is really low, because I think that would be interesting to understand. I know we are going to go to the formal Q&A now, so hopefully people have been furiously putting in their questions, and hopefully we'll get that chat coming up where I can see those questions, because that would be helpful. But in the meantime, I did have a quick question, because one of the things that I find ironic, and we see it all the time with CX being at the top of the list, number one, everybody wants that to be their priority. And you obviously mentioned, Nick, that 15% of brands, only 15% of brands actually would be considered CX leaders. So there's tons of them that are laggards, as you call them. So I'm just interested to know, why we think there's such a big gap, but equally, how do you start to understand where you are on that CX spectrum? And what steps do you take in order to actually start making a difference? I know that was quite a long question there for you, but hopefully both of you got that.
Well, the starting point, is always, and I suppose that's where, people come to us as researchers, because it fits into what Ian's talking about in terms of, his framework. Know thy customer. Start with understanding the strategy. So, if you like, we need a benchmark. We need to understand how well we're doing. Are we meeting expectations? And what's the future goal? How do we sit against the competition? So having a look at that, and then understanding this is down to really churning the data and really cutting that data to look at the stories to see where people can do quick wins straight away. Because I think maybe why people struggle, and it's still 52% are saying it's a challenge, is because it's a simple concept. We are nothing as businesses if we don't keep our customers and try and fill the funnel and get more customers. But when you're starting to make changes, and especially in big corporates, they're not set. Both of us have talked about this siloed nature. How can you start to make quick wins to really say, so the CFO recognizes that there's something in this, and you're not just really investing with the fact that, we do know that it's going to take 3 or 4 years to turn some of these, big liners around with how they are. But you do need to understand those quick wins. And I think it's being able to understand what they are, start to impact those, and then the recognition within the organization. And I'll let Ian pick up from this particular point, but I've not talked about employees in my section, but it's so crucial. For them to be engaged, to understand, to really be empowered to make those change. That's when you'll start to really get that change. And I think that's often the problem with a lot of these organizations. They're so huge, we're talking tens of thousands of employees. So sometimes, the commitment does need to come from the top down, but maybe it's in a small division within one country that starts to make a difference. And then everyone sits up and takes notice and says, hold on a minute, they're being very profitable and successful. What are they doing that's differently? And then
what's their secret sauce?
Exactly. And then from there, the burning fires can be set alight as you go across the globe and doing it, eating that elephant in small chunks.
Love that expression. Ian, what are your thoughts on that?
So I can only say it as it is, which is a warning that I'm about to be quite blunt. I'm in this very fortunate but unusual position of seeing customer experience evolve around the world, because I work on every continent apart from Antarctica at the moment, which I don't think will change anytime soon. And one of the greatest challenges that the profession that customer experience has become faces is that we are very often working in businesses where people do not have an understanding that customer experience is actually a science. Now, you may never have heard it described as a science before, and whilst it's not rocket science, there are a number of competencies that a business needs to determine whether or not it is mature in the adoption of those competencies. And regrettably, many businesses are led by individuals or teams of people who think they know all of this already. And it's very frustrating that if you were to, I always say to people, if I had £5 or $5 or €5 for every time a leader said to me, we put the customer at the heart of everything we do, I'd be a very wealthy man. But what they need to understand is that they can't just say it. It doesn't happen by osmosis, which is a quote I came up with a while ago. You've got to actually have something behind it. And what differentiates those who are no longer laggards is the fact that they understand that they never stop learning. And in my opinion, one of the most, if not the most transformational business leader of the moment is the CEO of Microsoft. Now, if you ask people who is the CEO of Microsoft, many people will look at you blankly because they don't know. And actually, that's part of the point, because he's a very humble leader. He's a man called Satya Nadella. And Satya Nadella is, I think, truly inspirational. And one of his mantras right now is that he's trying to turn Microsoft from a company that knows everything into a company that learns everything. And I think that's a very long-winded way of saying to you that the way of addressing this is education, education, education.
Yeah.
Among other things, I'm the course director for customer experience for the Chartered Institute of Marketing. Marketers have been getting qualifications for years, but haven't been taught the science of customer experience. So there is a lot of educating that still needs to be done.
Yeah, totally agree.
And I think, just building on that, Caroline, I'd just say that's probably as well, to Ian's point, why we're seeing this struggle and we're not seeing this momentum or change, because too often customer experience is seen as a soft subject. Let's lump it in with marketing. You can look after it as a side job. It's a full-time job, and that's why we've got customer experience managers and directors as well. But it really does need your full attention in order to start to make a change within an organization. It can't be just part of a day job.
Yeah, and I guess for businesses where they don't have a customer experience section or department, where does it sit? Where do we actually start to hone that? Is it marketing? Is it sales? Is it leadership?
So here comes the other challenge, because again, whilst it's a science and it's not rocket science, it's also not an exact science. Not that I want to confuse everyone, but it basically means that every organisation is different, and this is really important. There is no one size fits all, and that's why there is no customer experience textbook. What people need to understand is that to deliver a sustainably differentiating experience, you need to adapt to the nature of your organization. And so in a large multinational, it may well be right for there to be a chief customer officer sitting at the top of the organization. But not every business will need that. It depends. That it doesn't actually matter where it sits, as long as there is a clarity as to what the experience is, what you want it to be, and that this is an approach that is driven by that shared collective vision of the whole organization. Does it have to report into marketing? No. Could it be direct reporting to the CEO? Yes. Could it be? Absolutely. But the key, and this is the final thing I'll say, is whoever has that sort of responsibility for customer experience, every organization needs to understand that they are only the flag bearer. It is everyone's role to deliver the customer experience, and that person needs to bring the whole organization together.
Yeah. And I know when we were talking before, actually, we were saying about the fact that, yes, there are businesses with these departments that have customer experience experts within there. But, I think for small organizations, it's very hard to kind of show the ROI on customer experience. We can, it's quite an ethereal thing, although we know it has various touch points. How do you even begin to show ROI in those particular roles?
I'll comment on this first, Nick, and then chime in. Understanding the return on investment for customer experience has been a challenge for businesses for the last 15 years, and it continues to be a challenge. Now, that being said, there is a plethora of publicly available information that has proven beyond doubt that the more customer-centric an organization is, the greater the financial return. And I'm sure that Nick and his colleagues probably have access to data like that. But the important thing that businesses and professionals need to understand is that the return on investment comes in three forms. The first form is revenue generation. But revenue generation is the long-term financial return for focusing on customer experience. What I didn't say in my presentation, because I didn't want to depress anyone, is that for a legacy business to transform, it typically takes between 6 and 8 years.
Oh.
This is a long-term business strategy. And, this is something that many businesses don't have the ability to do. They're focusing on the numbers in front of their face. They're not focusing long-term. But what they need to understand is that there are two other forms of financial return. One is cost reduction. The other is cost avoidance. If customer experience is core to the strategy and you are able to eliminate the things that are creating the random experiences, you can stop those things from going wrong. Businesses will save billions. And this is the irony, because people just talk about customer experience, but we're in a world of austerity that's only going to get worse. And so they need to understand that if we focus on improving the experience, not only will we have happier customers, we will save money at the same time. And that's something that's misunderstood by many.
And I think another benefit that comes from that as well, Ian, is, that whole engagement piece, the employee satisfaction, if people are, facing blockers all the time and having to deal with, horrible conversations where they're not able to, because of product availability or whatever, in terms of, or maybe sometimes it's the sales and marketing team that are at loggerheads, because the sales team sell in their world and don't speak to the other back office operations to know that the product's not there, or they can't deliver it against the time scale that they gave. So but you get that employment engagement, which means that you've got happier workforce, more productive workforce, and it delivers against that. But so I totally agree with everything that Ian said there. And I think just to your other point around, large organizations we've been talking about, but what about smaller organizations? Actually, smaller organizations, we deal with larger organizations, but smaller organizations, when we've gone in there and spoken to them, they're so close to the customer. They're customer centric anyway.
Yeah.
They've not got this siloed nature that, a large corporate's got. It's like a market trader. Market trader doesn't need a market research company to tell him what the customer thinks. He's speaking to them every day. He knows the sentiment there, and he can change with the wind in terms of, being able to offer them something different. And so I think that's one of the superpowers that smaller businesses have, in that they're more agile. They don't need to have all this, legislation around decision making, and they are speaking to the customer on a regular basis.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that everyone's being elusive around smaller and large organizations. Ian, you mentioned Microsoft earlier, but I'd love to pick both your brains and just maybe get some examples of ones where they are doing a great example of customer experience, or actually the flip side where they're not doing so well. Put you on the spot.
Okay, that's a good question. Firstly, I would say that, again, many people need to be confident in the fact that customer experience and getting that real understanding of how to manage the ongoing relationship with the customer is not exclusive to B2C. I think many think it's just a B2C thing, but the majority of organizations who are intentionally adopting an approach to customer experience are actually in the B2B space, not the B2C. The challenge, though, is that, as Nick said, many think they're already doing it because they've already got relationship management, account management in place, and they may or may not have a CRM that they convince themselves that, yeah, we're good at this already. I've just had the pleasure of hosting an awards ceremony, ironically, an online awards ceremony, and it was the UK Digital Experience Awards. And most of the winners of the awards today were small B2B organizations that, in this case, have been using digital technology to get closer to their customers. But this is not the exclusive domain of large corporates. And as Nick said, large corporates find it very, very difficult to get a consistent approach. I think for me to name any specific company would probably not be appropriate, actually. I think that there.
I was hoping you'd go full for it.
Well, I'm trying to think of my ability to name one in the B2B space that is small that everyone would have heard of, and I think that's almost the problem. Is that
and there might be somebody listening in that you might want to hear.
But there are millions of small B2B organisations that I think are doing a great job of evolving, and I think, as I say, if they continue to evolve, then I think the greatest thing that we will see is that these larger corporates actually will struggle to survive. I think there is a real opportunity now. The only thing I will say, just as an example, and then I'll stop, is I do quite a lot of work in the pharmaceutical industry, which has been dominated by gigantic global companies. They are being severely challenged by small, niche B2B pharmaceutical companies who are focusing on one discipline, one area where they are starting to win because they really understand who the healthcare professional is. They're not just trying to flog them as many products as possible. They want to help that therapy area. So rather than name a company, I think an industry where we're seeing this is pharma.
Yeah,
and I think to come full circle on that, Caroline, I think the reason they're successful is because they know their customers.
Exactly.
So the starting point is speak to your customers, understand their needs, meet those needs, and then do something else.
Yeah.
Go over and above that, and you will have loyal fans forever. And that therefore results in a successful business.
Agreed.
Yeah, totally agree. And I'm going to get in trouble, but I'm going to ask you one more question. You've said go and find out information about your customer. Yes, people can go and speak to customers, but large corporates, they've got thousands, millions of customers. So where do you start? What tools or platforms or things can you use to actually help garner a lot of this information?
Well, I suppose I could start there.
I was going to say, it's a good plug for you.
Well, yeah, I mean, being in the market research, then that's why we do what we do, because people come to us and we've got the languages, we've got the know-how, we've got the tools in which being able to go out there and speak to people, whether it's qualitative, online, traditional, but equally, I mean, I think so obviously we can help in that respect, but there's lots of other ways. There's lots of data and information that sits underneath our noses in our companies. So many KPIs that we look at, but I think having conversations, start to have conversations with your colleagues. The sales force are at the coalface of their operations and speaking to customers all the time. So if you haven't got the money to then go down the market research line, then you can do your own and start to pull these different bits of information that, like the jigsaw that Ian shared with us in the theory side, is starting to piece that story together. And you will very quickly, start to hear like either pain points or areas where you can improve, and also areas where you can delight as well. So it doesn't always need to cost.
Yeah, excellent. We're gonna have to stop there. I can't believe we've just hit the hour. But Ian, Nick, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time on this, and it's super interesting. I mean, we could go on and on. So massive thank you, and I hope everyone that's listening in found that enlightening. To anyone who has more questions, please do filter them through to myself, and we can always come back to you. There will be a survey going out, so we welcome your feedback. Obviously this was the first virtual one, but we're always looking to improve things, or if you thought it was perfect, we want to hear it too. This will also be available on demand, so do feel free to share it with your colleagues. In the meantime, have a fantastic evening or rest of the day, and look forward to seeing you at our next B2BNXT event. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.